with a song, so if y'all stand with me, please.
Good morning. How is everybody doing? How is everybody doing? Okay, I don't know, can you hear me? I just want to thank everybody for making it out this morning. Did you miss us last year? Yes! Yes, so did I. Two years ago, I quit the job that I was teaching at and started at a new school and learning a new school and learning a new grade, having to go back to school myself. Ugh. I just felt like it, and I prayed about it, y'all. I didn't just say, I'm not doing it. I prayed about it, and I just felt like the Lord was saying, take a break this year, too. So that is the reason why we didn't have it last year, but we are excited to be back and excited to have all of you ladies here with us this morning. Faith over fear. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got that theme this morning. Back in April of last year, our speaker this morning, Crystal, had decided to start a book club. And the first book that we did was called Heaven Rules. And it was all about the life of Daniel and all the faith that he had to go through all the circumstances that were in his life. And so I started thinking, well, I like the name What If? What if I get thrown into the den of lions? What if this happens and this happens? Will I still trust in the Lord? Well, I didn't really like that. And then I thought about naming it Heaven Rules. But then I thought, well, maybe they'll get mad at me for using the name of that book. And, so I said, Faith Over Fear. And I thought that was just the perfect name for our theme this year. I also had to, last semester I didn't take any classes just because it about killed me last year with Weston being in basketball and this and that and all this kind of mess. So I said I won't take any. So I just started a new class Monday. And the Lord just knew I needed that because Satan has been on me all week long. I've let people down this week. The bags that y'all have, yeah, I did about 30 of them the wrong way. So just all sorts of things have happened this week. And even our two speakers this morning said, Jamie, pray for me. Satan is on us this week. And God knew that I needed this class because it's about the life of Christ. I took Life of Christ 1 last semester, and so I'm taking Life of Christ 2. And it's all talking about faith. That has been the last 6 lectures that I've listened to has been all about faith. And the woman with the issue of blood, the faith that she took to just knowing that if I just touch him, he will heal me. And so God just knew I needed that. Every lesson, I was all like, oh, I can't wait to listen to this to see how good it's going to be. So let us really quickly take out the little card that you have in your bag. Did everybody get a bag? Because if not, you need one. Did everybody get a bag? If you didn't, raise your hand, please. Everybody? Oh, we have one right here. Everybody got a card because we had a random one laying around after we were finished. Did everybody get a card? Because in the corner, that is your number for the door prizes. So make sure that you see that. We do have some pretty interesting little items in here. And this back of this card explains what each one of those items is talking about. So the water represents the faith when Peter had when he stepped out of the boat. The little fish, the little whales, represent the fear that Jonah had in the belly of the whale. And the scarlet bookmark represents the trust that Rahab had in an unseen God. And the rock represents the fearlessness of women that face their giants. And we can thank Amber and her kin for the rocks. They did a fantastic job on those rocks. They're super cute. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to have Cody over here, I guess, Ashley over here. And they have dad jokes that they're going to tell. But you cannot laugh. If you laugh, the other person that's not telling the joke gets the point. I get to laugh, though. I get to make y'all try to laugh. All right, so Emma, can you listen out to see if anybody laughs on your side? Okay. Hannah, can you look at it if anybody laughs on your side? Does everybody understand? So if Ashley's telling the joke and y'all laugh, well, it doesn't matter who's telling the joke, but if y'all laugh, Cody gets the point. You laugh, Ashley gets the point. Does everybody understand?
They're not that funny.
She's not getting the point. Ashley's getting the point because you're on preacher's side. But don't laugh then because you won't.
I'm already confused.
No, it don't matter. Nobody laugh. It doesn't matter who's telling the joke. Does everybody understand?
You laugh, you lose.
If you two laugh, the other person gets. Go.
But we're allowed to smile.
You're allowed to smile.
Good, that's my bread and butter.
Going first.
What do you get when you have a bovine brown hen and a Jersey cow?
What?
Brown chicken, brown cow.
What do you call a crocodile that loves guacamole?
What?
A guacadile.
What did the pirate say on his 80th birthday?
What?
Aye, matey.
Is butt cheeks one word, or should I spread them apart?
Did you hear about the Thanksgiving turkey that got in a fight?
No.
He got the stuffing beat out of him.
Albert Einstein was a genius, but his brother Frank, he was a monster.
My wife told me to get more in touch with my feminine side. So I crashed the car and then ignored her all day for no reason.
I saw a woman talking to her cat, and it was obvious she thought the cat could understand her. I told my dog about it, and we couldn't stop laughing.
Speaking of cats, did you hear about the cat that ate a ball of yarn?
No.
She had mittens.
My wife is blaming me for ruining her birthday. I mean, that's ridiculous. I didn't even know it was her birthday.
What do you call a spider with 10 eyes?
What?
A spider.
There was a man buying a banana, an apple, and 2 eggs. The cashier says, "You must be single." The man replies, "Wow, how did you know?" She said, "Because you're ugly."
Why does Donkey Kong always wear a tie?
Why?
Monkey business, that's why.
Apparently, 1 in 5 people in the world are Chinese. I'm from a family of 5, so either my mom, dad, my older brother, Chuck, or my younger brother, Ho Chan Chu. But I think it's Chuck.
The other day during a ball game, my wife turned off the television screaming. She said, "You haven't listened to a single thing that I've said." I thought, that's a really weird way to start a conversation.
Whoever said I can't cook hasn't tried my 3 a.m. handful of shredded cheese.
What did the janitor say when he jumped out of the supply closet?
Supplies! My wife and I laugh about how competitive we are, but I laugh more.
My wife got mad at me for picking on her for having no sense of direction, so she packed up all of her clothes and right.
Just when you think that food cannot possibly call you on the phone, boom, onion rings. Come on now.
What's the best thing about Switzerland?
I don't know.
I don't either, but their flag is a big plus.
2 Wi-Fi engineers got married. The wedding was so-so, but the reception, it was amazing.
What does Alexander the Great and Kermit the Frog have in common? Their middle name.
My pet mouse, Elvis, he died last night. He was caught in a trap.
And I bet you were all shook up.
Uh-huh.
Why can't you hear a pterodactyl go to the bathroom?
Why?
Because the P is silent.
What do you call a bedpan in Russian?
I don't know.
A Putin.
You really got to hand it to short people because they just can't reach it.
I don't know why everybody's so down on or always complaining about lazy people. I mean, they didn't do anything.
Last one apiece, guys. Do your best one.
The other day, I bought a thesaurus. It was terrible. It was also terrible.
I had a lot of wife's jokes, but this was going to be my last one. My son asked, "What does a man do?" I replied, "A man is someone who is responsible and cares for their family." My son said, "I hope one day I can be a man just like Mom."
Thank you, guys. All right. Cody's side one. That's what I want to hear when you win these door prizes, ladies. Oh. All right, ladies. We're going to now have our ladies come up. We're going to have a special song. It's the ladies of our choir. So y'all can come on up while I'm introducing our speaker. Our speaker, both of the ladies that are speaking this morning are from our church. One has been here since birth, and then the other one is our youth pastor's wife, and they've been here 6 years? Is that 6 years. You behind me. And the Lord just led me to them. Crystal is the one who came up with the book idea of Heaven Rules, not to write the book, to study it. And so the Lord just led me to her because she had already done all the studying already on Daniel, and I knew she's just going to do a fantastic job. She is a precious individual, and I love her dearly. And so after we sing, she is going to come up and give us our first devotion.
believe it. You said it. It is done. You said it. I believe it. You said it. It is done. You said it. I believe it. You said it. It is done. You said it. I believe it. You said it. It is done. You said it. I believe it. You said it. It is done. You said it. I believe it. You said it. It is done. The immovable, break the unbreakable. God, we believe. God, we believe for it. From the impossible, we'll see a miracle. God, we believe. God, we believe for it. God, we believe. God, we believe for
And isn't that so true that God is the only one who can move the immovable in our lives? I'm so thankful for that. I'm so glad to be with y'all this morning. When Miss Jamie talked to Noatus and I after choir practice one Sunday, she said, "Are you ladies going to be here for our ladies meeting in June?" And we were like, yeah, we'll be here. Our next thought, I'm sure from both of us, was she's going to ask us to play or she's going to ask us to sing. And she asked us to speak. And I said, well, we were talking, and I said, what's the theme? And she said, faith over fear. And I thought, well, that's appropriate. Fear, public speaking, they go hand in hand. So I said, well, you're going to have to let me think about this. And she said, well, the Lord led me to ask y'all. And I thought, well, you need to get your hearing checked. But she knew she had us then. Like, how can you say no when she said that? So, but all joking aside, she's already mentioned the fact that this topic is one that a group of ladies and I have studied together at my home, and it's one that is especially personal to me, which I'll get into a little bit later. And also, I can't wait to hear Noatus speak next. I know that she's lived this in her life ever since I've known her, but especially in the last few months. She's gone through trials and always been a testimony of how good the Lord is. So let's look at fear in general first. And I need y'all to help me out, because when I speak or when I teach, it always helps me if I feel like I'm getting some participation from y'all. So I'm going to talk about some general fears, and this is where we admit to things. When I name yours, raise your hand, because I'm going to tell you mine in just a minute. So it's only fair if I tell you mine, you got to tell me yours. So I'm going to name a few, and if they fit you, then raise your hand. Heights. Closed-in spaces. Spiders. Okay, let me tell you another one of mine. Spiders are scary, but I would let 10 spiders crawl all over me before I would let a mouse get anywhere near me. Okay. All right, how about snakes? How about speaking in public? Okay, storms, like tornadoes, those things. I knew I was going to get one there. And I know at least 2 people, myself included, here today, are scared of those little green sticky frogs. I knew it. But those are some fears that, are general, that we all know about, that we all have in common, some of those fears. But I read about some odd fears, and I'm going to tell you those. There is the fear of the color yellow, the fear of bathing, Have you ever sat beside somebody that evidently had that fear? Hopefully that's not the case this morning. The fear of balloons, the fear of long words, and ironically, the name of that fear is one of the longest words in the dictionary. That just doesn't seem right, right? The fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. These are real fears. And my favorite is the fear of phobias, which that is people who are afraid of being afraid. So those are some odd fears that I read about. My biggest fear, I told y'all I would tell you, my biggest fear is flying. I try to act all cool and calm when we fly, but I am just like a slight notch below panic. You remember, and this is going to tell my age, you remember that show, The A-Team? You remember Mr. T on The A-Team? Cody's back there raising his hand. When he was scared of flying, so when he would fly, they would knock him out. And then when they got there, they would wake him up. I think that's perfect. I mean, I would love it if somebody would just knock me out, and when I get there, we're all good. Recently, my daughter Hannah, she's home now, but she was in college in Pensacola. She had to have a minor procedure done while she was there, and I needed to go. She needed me to be there. And so Joe, my husband, said, you need to go. And so I thought, great, I'll go. I'll drive, and, it's like 13 hours. We've done it before, but I had like 4 days, and so I would have been on the road for 2 of those. And so when he vetoed that, I was like, I can't go. I mean, literally, I thought to myself, I can't go. She needed me, but I didn't want to fly. And this wasn't just flying, this was flying by myself. Normally, flying looks like me gripping Joe's hand until we get there. And every time we hit turbulence, I grip it even harder. And he looks at me, he's like, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. But this was by myself. So I asked Joe, I said, well, who's going to fly with me? And he said, Jesus. And I said, you just pulled a Miss Jamie on me. That is not fair. But I did it. I have a playlist on my phone. It's called Peace and Calming Gospel. It has like 10 songs on it. Well, there's 2 flights to Pensacola. There's not a direct flight. So I figured out that I could turn that playlist on and I could listen to all of those songs and it would get me to my next flight. So I closed my eyes, I prayed, I counted down those songs, and then we would land. It worked out great. So to anybody near me, I just looked like a person listening to music. They had no idea that I was scared to death. So now you know my biggest fear. If you see a picture of me flying with a smile on my face, you know I'm faking it because it's not true. But there's also fears associated with the season of life that we're in, and I thought about some of those. When we're children, we're afraid of things like getting bad grades or disappointing our parents or not having friends. I asked some of our teenagers that I love, sweet girls, what some of their fears were, and they said the thought of what others may think of me, the fear of being left out, never finding a boyfriend or getting married. And then college age ladies fear choosing the wrong career, never finding lifelong friends, never getting married. And then when we do get married, we fear that we're never going to be able to have children. And if we're blessed to have children, then brand new fears begin. We have the fear of failing as a parent, the fear of being unable to raise godly children in the world we live in, understandably so. The fear of what other mothers may think of us. There's a lot of comparison going on nowadays, that fear. The fear of choosing the right school for our children, the fear of someone else hurting them. You know those fears as parents. When they become teenagers, we fear that we can no longer fix their problems. We fear their choice of friends. We fear whether they're going to stand up for what's right. We fear how they feel. Are they lonely? Do they have friends? And when they start driving, that is a whole nother set of fears. And here's a newsflash for you. If you aren't there yet, I'm there. When your kids are grown, you don't stop being a parent, and you don't stop fearing for them. I've learned recently that nobody warns us about this stage of life that I'm in. I'm in my 40s, and they tell you, you know, your kids are going to grow up. That's going to hurt. You're going to have to let go of them. But what I didn't realize is that at the same time we're trying to help our children make decisions, we're also trying to help our parents make hard decisions in their lives. And my husband had no idea that in his 40s, he would lose both of his parents within a year and a half unexpectedly. We just didn't know about that those things would be hard at the same time as our children are leaving the house. And what about those of you who are in the senior saint season? You have those fears of maybe losing your health, not being able to take care of yourself, losing your spouse. My point is each season comes with its own set of joys. There are joys throughout all of those seasons, but there are also fears in those seasons as well. And we need new grace that only Jesus can give in each of those seasons of our life. We experience the thought of those fears. Some of those fears that I talked about, we experience those on a daily basis. But have you ever come face to face with one of those? Worse even, have you ever come face to face with a paralyzing fear that you never dreamed would happen? I can take you to the place in the hospital where fear paralyzed me and consumed me. If I closed my eyes right now, I could be right there, right back in it. I would feel the same thing. It just completely overwhelmed me. But I can also take you to the chair in that hospital room where I told the Lord that I can't do this, that this is too much, and He spoke to my heart and said, I've got you. In the midst of this valley, the Lord said to me, I'm still here. And He said 2 words to my heart. Miss Jamie's already said them. I'm wearing them on my ears this morning, and they hang on a sign in my house. What am I going to say, ladies? What did He say? He said, heaven rules. When I started looking over this subject again, when she talked about Daniel, it brought me back to such a familiar time. It's like coming back to an old friend. I opened up my Bible and there was Daniel. I've learned so much from his life and from what the Lord taught us through his testimony. So this phrase, heaven rules, it actually only appears in Daniel one time, but it's alluded to throughout the entire book of Daniel. If you open my Bible throughout Daniel, you'll see HR written all throughout the whole book of Daniel. It points to the fact that God is sovereign and that heaven rules. This concept of heaven rules, that's what's going to give us the faith that we need when fear comes. But don't just take my word for it. Turn with me to Daniel and let's look at some of the verses. Daniel chapter 1. While you're turning there, first of all, when we're introduced to Daniel, where do we find him? Somebody tell me, where is he? Daniel chapter 1. Is he home? Where is he? He's in Babylon. He's in captivity. From what we can understand, Daniel is a teenager. He's about 14 years old. Now, our youngest just turned 18, and she's about to go to college for the first time. And, of course, she's nervous just like anybody else. In fact, we have several teenagers in our church who are about to make that move. But she knows that she's only 4 hours from home, and so once a month she's going to come home or we're going to see her. That's not where Daniel was. Daniel was far away from home, and all that was familiar to him. All the places he liked to hang out, all the friends he liked to be around. He was away from all that, and not only was he away from it, he didn't know if he would ever see it again. He had no promise that he would ever be able to come back to home, ever again. He was also taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar was number 1 man. He was the highest on the totem pole. Well, Daniel was nobody. He was one of the lowest. The culture was different. The customs were different, the food was different, and obviously the worship was different. And if that wasn't enough to be afraid of, Daniel faced a lifetime of challenges. You know, sometimes when we read Daniel, we look at his challenges and they're like in succession. So we think, okay, he went through this, and then he went through this, and he went through. That's not how it happened. He didn't face a few challenges and then he laid back and lived in peace the rest of his life. He faced one challenge after another all throughout his lifetime. He didn't conquer these things and move on to this life of peace. He just moved on to the next challenge. Don't we feel like that's how life is sometimes? We're just moving on to the next challenge. I don't know about y'all. I've never faced the fears of Daniel. I've never been taken away from my home. I've never been threatened. My life's been threatened. I've never had to face powerful kings, and I've certainly never faced a lion before. But Daniel did. These were serious fears. Did Daniel ever have days of doubt? Of course he did. He did. But he passed every test put before him in Scripture because Daniel could see the story behind the story. John Piper says, God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of 3 of them. And that's so true when we think about it. God is working. God is working in our world, in our nation. He is, whether we think it or not, he is working. He's working in our state, in our church, in our families, and he's working through our individual lives. We just don't see it sometimes. But we can be more aware. We can start looking through this same lens that Daniel did. This lens of heaven rules, this idea that God is sovereign and doesn't allow anything in our lives that does not first come through him. That's the way Daniel lived his life. Let's look at a few of the problems that Daniel had, since you have your Bibles open to Daniel 1:1. His first problem was the exile and the test of the king's meat. Daniel 1:1 says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. Now that was like the newspaper version, like read all about it. Nebuchadnezzar takes over Jerusalem. That's what the headlines were all about. And God was in that. God allowed that. That was the big picture. That's what was going on. But God also was working in the lives of 4 individuals. Not just 4, but the ones we're talking about, Daniel and his 3 friends. Daniel 1:2 says, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Not only did God allow Jerusalem to be taken and Babylon to take them into captivity, the children of Israel, but he allowed them to take the Lord's vessels out of the Lord's house. And to them, to the Babylonians, this meant we've won. What it said to them is that our God is more powerful than the God of the children of Israel. It was bragging rights to them. From an earthly perspective, just looking at it from an earthly perspective, Nebuchadnezzar was winning. Babylon was winning. The Lord had forsaken his children. That's what it looked like from the outside. You can imagine Nebuchadnezzar walking around, shoulders back. Just he knew he was the man at the time. But you know what Daniel understood about Nebuchadnezzar? That he was actually just a piece of the puzzle that the Lord was using to speak to his children. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was the most powerful man on earth, but Daniel knew that he was just a piece of what God was using to teach his children. He knew that he was trying to accomplish a purpose through Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel understood this. How do we know he understood this? Because we never see in Scripture where Daniel says, Lord, why me? I love you. My family loves you. We worship you. I don't understand what you are doing. He may have had some of those questions, but we never see him doubt. Daniel understood that heaven rules and that God is sovereign in the good things and in the bad things as well. So when he was faced with the choice of eating the king's meat, Daniel respectfully asked the prince of the eunuchs if they could choose their own diet. Now, we know that if this backfires, it's not only bad for Daniel, but it's bad for his friends, and it's bad for the prince of the eunuchs. Verse 14 in chapter 1 says, so he, meaning the prince of the eunuchs, consented to them in this matter. Verse 17 says, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Who gave him this understanding? God did. God gave it to him. Nancy says, and I'll refer to her several times, it's from the book that Miss Jamie was talking about, Heaven Rules. Nancy DeMoss says, the same God who rules over nations and who handed Judah over to the king of Babylon was also at work in the details of his people's lives. And the same is true for you and me. God will always give you what you need in ways that may not be clear or even visible to you in the moment. He's preparing you for opportunities and circumstances that lie ahead of you. Challenges that may be harder than the ones you're currently experiencing, things you probably don't see coming and may not even be able to imagine. But if you allow him, the Lord is preparing you for that. Problem number 2 for Daniel was the first dream, and it's found in Daniel chapter 2 in verse 1. Verse 1 says, and in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled and his sleep brake from him. Verse 3 says, and the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. So of course, Nebuchadnezzar wants to know what this dream is, and had he told his wise people, his astrologers, all those people that he went to, if he had told them the dream, they probably would have come up with something to interpret it, but he couldn't even remember what it was. And so he goes to them and he wants them to answer that question. Not only tell me what the dream meant, but what is it that I dreamed again? And they can't do it. And they said, there's not a man upon earth, and they were right. There wasn't a man upon earth without help from the Lord that could answer the question that Nebuchadnezzar gave to them. And because of this, Nebuchadnezzar was not only going to kill them, he was going to kill all of the wise men in Babylon. Who did that include? Daniel and his 3 friends. And so when the king's guard knocks on Daniel's door, he knocks on Daniel's door because Daniel's going to be killed along with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. I'm sure he expects, when he knocks on the door and Daniel answers, I'm sure he expects Daniel to try to run away or to give an excuse as to why he should not be killed. But Daniel answers him in this manner. He says, just give me a little while to be able to explain the dream to the king. And then what does he do with maybe this fear that starts to build in his heart, because this is a big responsibility. It's not only his life, it's the lives of many others too. Verse 17 tells us what Daniel does. It says, then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. He called on his prayer partners. And it's so important, ladies, that we have those people in our lives. I have those people. I'm very thankful to the Lord that I have those. I have ladies that I know that are praying for me right now. And that's what Daniel did. He went to those people with his burdens and he asked them, take it to the Lord, because I can't do this. I can't interpret this dream. I have no idea what it is. Take it to the Lord. And so that's exactly what they did. I'm sure Daniel still had faith in this circumstance, but the circumstance was about to get even stickier, because once he found out what the dream was and the interpretation of it, he didn't want to tell the king what the interpretation was. Chapter 2, verse 27 and 28 says that Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the kings hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers, show unto the king. He's really setting him up. He's saying, none of these people that you went to can tell you what this dream is. Then he says this, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions on of thy head upon thy bed are these. And then he tells him that there's this statue. It's made of a head of gold. It has chest and arms of silver, has belly and thighs of bronze, and it has legs and feet of iron and clay. And then he tells him the gold represents the Babylonian Empire. And once again, I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar's like, well, that's awesome because we're the head of the statue and it's made of gold. And Daniel says to him in verse 37, "Thou, O king, art a king of kings." But then he says, "Why are you a king of kings? For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory." Now, if Nebuchadnezzar had fully acknowledged this, his whole future might have been different, but he chose not to. Again, Nancy DeMoss says, imagine a person of Nebuchadnezzar's abilities and influence operating his life around the concept that nothing he possessed was earned, that he owed everything pertaining to his prominent position to the God of the heavens. His whole future might have been different. His season of insanity might have been avoided. His kingdom and his people might have been set up for generation after generation of blessing. If he had had Daniel's faith, if he had humbled himself before the Lord, he would have had nothing to fear. And then problem number 3. About 20 years have gone by. Aren't you glad that God is long-suffering with us? That's what he was doing for Nebuchadnezzar. He was giving him time. Hey, get rid of that pride that's in your heart. I don't want to have to bring judgment on you. I'm giving you the opportunity. He gave Nebuchadnezzar this time to recognize what the Lord was trying to do in his life. But he didn't change. He didn't get rid of the pride in his life. So in chapter 4, verse 4, Nebuchadnezzar's telling this. He says, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace." He's saying, I had it all. I had money, I had fame, I had power. Life couldn't be any better. The Lord had already tried to get Nebuchadnezzar to understand that it was the Lord who sets up kingdoms and tears them down. But like us, at times, he did not want to recognize that he couldn't take his next breath, or he couldn't even quite literally think his next thought without the power from God. And it changes. Nebuchadnezzar's whole demeanor changes in one verse. In verse 5, he says, "I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me." Now guess who comes on the scene? Daniel. Daniel, who lived his life with the Lord as the anchor for his soul, with no fear. Daniel was about to break some terrible news to him. And he told him, he said, this dream that you've dreamed, this dream about, and I'll shorten it for time's sake, you've dreamed this dream about this big tree and how it shades everyone and it has power over everything. And then you saw that something comes in and it cuts that tree down to the ground. And he explains to him, the Lord's going to take away your kingdom and you are going to be as an animal. You're going to lose your mind for 7 years. And verse 17 tells us, why is the Lord doing this to this king? Why is the king's life consumed with fear? One reason, and there's some verses that point it out. Verse 17, the Lord says, "To the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men." Verse 25 says, "The Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men." Verse 32 says, "Until thou knowest that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men." And then the verse where we get the phrase, heaven rules. Verse 26, after that, after all of this, Nebuchadnezzar, this is what the Lord's saying, after all of this, you're going to know, thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Nancy says, it is a truth meant to instill healthy fear within every proud heart that aims to be its own ruler and that believes we humans can determine our own direction and destiny. So for those people, it's fear because you have no control over your life and it can be taken from you at any time, and your health and your prosperity and everything can be taken. But she also says this same truth that corrects us is also intended to comfort us, to reassure us and to free us, to catch us and to keep us. And that's what it did in Daniel's life. He was living proof. Heaven rules means that God is sovereign over everything that touches us, that nothing comes to us unbidden by his desire to use it for our good and for his glory. The truth that is powerful enough to take down the great is also powerful enough to bear up the least of us. This is the story of Daniel. This is the power of God. This is the love of God. This is the patience of our God. And even after this decree, even after the 20 years, even after the number of times that Daniel spoke into Nebuchadnezzar's life, the Lord still gave him a year. But he never changed. In that year, he could have learned his lesson. He could have submitted to the God of Daniel. He could have seen the love and forgiveness that the Lord extended to him. But he didn't, and it literally drove him mad. The same applies to us. We can trust the Lord's sovereignty. We can choose to see him working in our lives. We can increase our faith, or we can live in fear. Now, at this point in my notes, I have 3 other fears that Daniel faced and the way that the Lord worked in them. And I know that I'm running short on time. I was actually following that clock right there, and it's not right. Why do you do that, Brother Cody? I know why he does that, because he doesn't pay any attention to it. He just keeps preaching. Okay, so I'm just going to keep talking for a little while if you'll bear with me. At this point, several weeks ago, I wrote down, I typed out personal testimony, and that's all it says. And it stayed that way for weeks. It stayed that way. Not because I don't want to share my testimony with you ladies, but because my testimony as a mother is so tied up with my daughter's testimony that I didn't feel like it was my place to tell it until she was ready to tell it. And a few weeks ago at our mother-daughter banquet, she did. She began to tell part of her story and some of the hardest parts of it. So I felt like when we left that meeting that the Lord gave me the opportunity to talk to her and just to ask her permission. Is it okay if I share what the Lord did in our lives? I'll try to tell it through my point of view, but it's your story as well. Is that okay with you? Because I would never do anything to embarrass her. And she said, absolutely. And that was faith over fear on her part, and I'm very proud of her for that. So if you'll give me just a minute, I'll share with you how this idea of heaven rules came to me personally, where I met it head on, face to face in our lives. When she was little, about 2 years old, we began to notice that she would get very nervous. And that's not unusual for kids that age. You know, loud noises, they get nervous around loud noises, or people who, speak loudly or very exuberant. We really didn't think much of it until she began to pull out her hair. And I'm not talking about a strand of hair here and there. We would open her little chubby hand and she would have handfuls of hair in her hand. And so when we went to the pediatrician about 2 years old, we talked to her about it. And she told us she needs to go on medication as soon as she can because this is tied to anxiety. And at that time I thought, no, we're not going to do that. So we tried to do what we could. We tried to, take her focus away from pulling her hair. We tried to make sure that circumstances were calm. We tried to do as much as possible as we could to make her feel safe. And things started to get better to an extent, outwardly anyway. She didn't pull her hair as much, and we thought that things were getting better. Let me stop and say one thing before I go any further. She was 2 years old when this started. There was nothing traumatic going on in our lives. Our home was peaceful, and she had what you would call a normal childhood. The Lord allowed her to suffer with anxiety. He did. The same way he allows people to suffer with diabetes, heart problems, or any other type of illness. As she got older, the anxiety plagued her life in everyday things. It just made it hard for her to do anything. And we were aware that this was becoming more of an issue. Things that other people just handled easily, everyday things, she just couldn't. She just couldn't handle it. About 3 years ago, it started showing itself more and progressively got worse. And everyday things for her became a struggle. I remember her saying to me one day we were coming back from school, I remember her saying to me, "Mom, I've prayed and I asked the Lord if he would just give me something physically wrong with me. If he would really just give me like a heart problem, like a legitimate physical heart problem. That way, at least I would understand and people around me could understand." And I would encourage her to pray, and we would go over Bible verses together, and she would look at me and say, "It's not working. I don't understand why the Lord is not taking this away." So my husband and I, we prayed and we prayed and we prayed, "Lord, please take this away. Please take this away from her." He didn't, and I started praying, "Please help us understand how to help her through this." It got to the place where she wouldn't talk about it anymore. I understand that anxiety and depression are two different things, but she had been going through so much anxiety in her life that it led her to a place of depression. She would come home from school and she would lay her head in my lap for hours. She wouldn't say a word, and she did it every day. I can't imagine what she was going through on the inside. But again, this is my part of the testimony. As a mom, I know what to do. I would ask her, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I've since learned that that's not the question to ask, but I didn't know at the time. We had never gone through anything like this before. So we mentioned to her youth pastor, to Brother Nick, that she was struggling, and he began to pray for her. And he gave us a book. I have it with me. It's How to Help a Person Who's Going Through Emotional Hurts. And it's written by a pastor here in North Carolina who also counsels and deals with this kind of thing. So he gave me that book, and I began to read it, and I read everything I could about anxiety. And I learned some things that growing up, I don't think anybody ever really told me this. It's just what I learned growing up. My parents never said this. Our preacher never said this. But I kind of got this feeling from people around me that people thought that anxiety and depression are sins and are a spiritual problem. Now, let me say that they can indicate a spiritual problem. And so we went down that road and we asked a lot of questions. It can be a spiritual problem. There's no doubt about that. But there's also examples in the Bible that say that it's not just a spiritual problem. For instance, if you don't think David, a man after God's own heart, dealt with it, read Psalms again. He had periods of depression, doubt. He battled discouragement. Elijah, after he had one of the greatest triumphs in his life, a mountaintop experience, he asked the Lord to take his life. He was that low after that experience. And in modern times, or more modern times since the Bible, Martin Luther battled bouts of depression and often quoted 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." Charles Spurgeon wrote, "I have suffered many times from this severe sickness and frightful mental depression, sinking almost to despair. Almost every year I have been laid aside for a season." Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this to encourage you, those of you that may be struggling, the ones of you that the devil is saying, "You're just not spiritual enough to kick this." It's not true. The situation for us did not get any better. We found out that since she could not deal with the things that she had been feeling, that she began to hurt herself. We knew then that something had to be done. Now, we hadn't shared this with anyone, so it was a lonely, lonely few months. Even our older two children didn't know much about it. They were away at college, so they didn't really realize the extent of what was going on. And I'm telling you that to tell you this, that most of the time when someone's dealing with anxiety or depression, you will never know it. When people began finding out, they would say things like, "But she always looks so happy." Yes, she does. On the outside, when she's in public, she looks really happy. But I can take you to pictures where she has a big smile on her face, and I know for a fact that it's not real. I know what she's going through. So we don't know what people are going through. Now, sometimes people speak out about it. Sometimes they feel like they can do that, but it's not always the case. A few months before things really escalated, Noanis began sending me quotes from the book Heaven Rules. That's not unusual for us. We often share things from our quiet time, so when she began sending me those quotes, I read them, and I didn't think much else about it until the Lord started speaking to me through those quotes. And I thought, okay, I got to read this book now. I realized looking back that this was the Lord's way of preparing me for what was ahead. In the meantime, we had done two things. We had scheduled an appointment with our doctor, and Brother Cody, our pastor, had begun talking with our daughter and sharing some things with her. Now, he's one of her favorite people. He has been since he got here. And she would listen to what he said, but she wasn't ready to talk or share anything yet. Around this same time, our pastors had gone to a conference, and the author of the book that Brother Nick gave me was there. That's Heaven Rules. And he came back. It was one of the first times, actually, that I felt like the Lord hasn't forgotten us. This is God's sovereignty in this situation. And when Brother Nick came back, he said, I hope you don't mind, but I talked to, and then he went to proceed to tell us what he said. And in the back of my mind, it was in that chair out in the front, I remember thinking, mind? No, we don't mind. Like, we feel like our child is drowning, and we're trying to hold her up, and we don't know what else to do. I don't mind. I'm very thankful. And he told us, he said, this is what Dr. Moody told us. He told us 4 things. He said the hair pulling thing is not a habit. It is linked with anxiety. He said, number 2, you can't deal with this alone anymore. She needs help. Number 3, you need to see a doctor, and I'm so thankful for a spiritual leader who would say, you need to see a doctor. And number 4, she needs a godly counselor who specializes in anxiety, and I can point you in the right direction. You have no idea how we felt when he said those words to us. He gave us some contact information. My husband reached out, and I promise I'm trying to get through this fast. I know I'm going over. He gave us a list of counselors to call. My husband started that process, and it is a process. And we went to see our doctor. This is another Heaven Rules, God's sovereignty. Our doctor is the best, and that's hard to find. She's a Christian. She talks. She listens. She's there to support you. We're very thankful for her. And so she began to ask her a lot of questions that I expected. And I also knew the answer she was going to give. Nothing took me by surprise. Until she got to the point where she said, have you ever thought about taking your life? My husband and I were with her, and I thought, before she answered, I thought, she's in a low place. She's never thought that. And the answer to that question was yes, many times. The doctor asked Joe and I to step outside, and she talked to her a few minutes longer. And Joe looked at me and he said, I know you want to fall apart, but you can't do it right now. You can do it later when it's just the 2 of us, but we got to be here for her right now. You can't do it right now. And fear began to take over, and it began to consume me at that point. It began to work its way into my life. And I remember a few weeks later, I was standing in the hallway of our house, and it had been a particularly bad day. And I remember the Lord speaking in my heart and saying, I was sharing with the Lord, these are my feelings, this is what we're going through. He knew, but I was laying my heart out to him. And I remember him speaking to my heart and saying, it's going to get worse. And I thought, worse than this? It can't get worse. She began taking medicine. They gave her one of the lowest doses that they could prescribe to her, and it wasn't working. If anything, things were getting worse, and so we knew that we had to do something else about it. One evening, it was about 10 days before Christmas, I was hunting with my dad, so I wasn't at home. It was just her and her dad. And he called me. My husband called me, and he said, "You got to come home." He said, "Something is not right." He said, "She is in a bad place. You need to come home." And I'm not going to go into all the details about that, but she was in a bad place. We thought that, okay, we've talked to her and things are okay. We let her lay on her bed for a little while upstairs. And a few minutes later, she came downstairs. And she said, "I'm sorry." And I thought, she's sorry because, you know, of everything that just transpired. And she hates that we're going through this. She's sorry for how upset she got. But she looked at me, she said, "I'm sorry, but I just took some pills." I knew then that everything was about to be taken out of our hands. I knew that any control that I had felt up to this part was gone. So we called the ambulance, and they took her to the hospital. They asked some questions, and I was allowed to ride with her. But once we got there, they left us standing in the hall, and I just remember that place just being scared to death. When they finally let us in, the nurse came in and they said, "Okay, we're going to take her blood every 30 minutes, and we're going to check and see the levels of this medication in her system so that we'll know how best to treat it." And then she left, and a caseworker came in to speak to us, and she was not rude at all. She was just very matter of fact. And she was just doing her job. And she didn't know us from Adam. For all she knew, we could be the reason why she was feeling this way. And so she told us that the next day that our daughter would be taken to a facility, and that we would have no say in which one it was, and that we would have no say in her treatment, and that we would have no say in how long she would be there. She would be there for 2 weeks up to 6 months. And she left. She just walked out. She came back an hour later, and she gave us some brochures of 4 of the facilities that they use. And I remember asking my husband, I'm like, "Why is she doing this? If we have no say in where she's going to go or the treatment she's going to receive, why even hand me the brochures?" But I think she had begun realizing that we wanted to do what was best for our daughter. And so she gave us those brochures, and she left. And my husband called a friend of ours who's a nurse with mental health patients, works with mental health patients. And he asked him, he said, "These are the 4 facilities she gave us. You tell me what you think." And he said, "I think I wouldn't leave my child at any of those places." We were at the end of ourselves at that point. Like, well, what do? I can't say she can't go. They're telling us she's going. We sat there for a few minutes, and the nurse came in, and she said, "Her levels are at the point where we're going to have to do something about it if she doesn't get sick on her own and start getting rid of some of that." She's like, "She's got 30 minutes. If we check them again, we're going to have to do something." About 5 minutes after she left, she became sick, and she started getting rid of that medication on her own. Now, through all of this, she just kind of laid there. She knew what was going on. I had explained it to her. This is what's going on. This is what's going to happen tomorrow. I wanted her to know this is the reality of where we're at. She didn't care. She did not care at that point what would happen to her. About 2 in the morning, I convinced my husband to go home and get a few hours of sleep. Our other daughter was home from college, and she had some friends with her, and of course she was devastated over what had happened, and he needed a few hours of sleep before I knew what we would face in the morning. So when he left, I sat in the hospital chair and I poured my heart out to the Lord. I told him what I told you in the beginning: there's no way I can do this. I could not leave my daughter. This was too hard. And then I said, "Lord, I know you want what is best for her, and I know this is not yet. You have led us all along the way, and I know in my heart of hearts this is not what's best for her." And I'm telling you, he was in that room with me just as much. I've never felt him more real. Just as much as if I could lay eyes on him, he was right there with me. Nothing about our situation changed at that point in time. But he changed me because I knew he was there. A few hours later, my husband came back, and we knew that in just a couple of hours, we were going to have to leave her. And the caseworker came back in, and she asked him, she said, "Have you been able to get a date for her to be able to speak to the counselor?" And again, I thought, why are you asking this? She's about to go to a facility. She's going to be talking to somebody. What difference does that make? And then she said, I've never said this to a patient's family before, but last night I couldn't sleep, and I prayed, and I asked the Lord what I could do, how I could best help y'all. And he spoke to my heart and said, send her home. She will be better. When she said that, I completely lost it. I could not talk. I know she thought, what in the world? But I told her, I said, while you were praying, so were we, and you are God's answer to prayer. That night, our faith, it wasn't a mustard seed. It was almost invisible. But heaven ruled, and he would have ruled no matter the outcome. But he ruled in the situation, and he worked in only ways that he could have. Since then, we've learned so many things about her anxiety. We've had her gene tested, and we've learned that she has a gene present in her DNA that lends itself to cause anxiety. We've learned what medication works best for her, and we've met Karen, who is her godly counselor that has invested hours and hours in her life. And we cannot praise the Lord enough for all the ways that he has worked in her life. He hasn't taken her anxiety away, but he has, and he is proving that he is always sufficient for every need we have. And this fall, she will begin college at Liberty University. You know what she's studying? Biblical counseling. You know why? Because she wants to be for someone else what her counselor, Karen, and what this lady in the hospital was for her. And I'm praying that that's exactly what she allows the Lord to do in her life. I would never choose to go through anything like this again. I know that some of you have walked through valleys worse. I understand that. I wouldn't choose that for any of us, but I tell you what, I wouldn't trade anything for the things that the Lord has taught us through it. In closing, I promise I'm closing. In closing, let me say, I have people in my life right now who are battling physical problems, emotional problems, spiritual problems. And let me say, this thing of mental health, this crisis that the world keeps talking about it's in the church. It's not just in the world. One of the godliest young ladies I know right now is going through some of the same stuff in her own life. And it's time we start helping. And it's time we start realizing that it's living where we are, and it's not just in the world, it's where we are. But they're going through things I never imagined could happen. How does heaven rule in those situations? He rules in the same way he did in ours. He just does. I don't have to understand it. I don't have to agree with it. And the Lord never asked my opinion on any of these situations. I'm glad he didn't. I just have to accept it. And when I do, it changes everything. It doesn't change the circumstance or the situation that I'm in, but it changes my attitude, my outlook. It calms my spirit. It gives me hope. It wraps me in love. It changes everything. God is bigger and more real than anything that is pressing into our lives in this season. Nancy DeMoss says, heaven rules, and there is nowhere he is not, comforting us, giving us courage through our tears, through our fears, calling and leading us to worship him. Thank you, ladies.
Hold on a second. I didn't know it was good. Thank you, Crystal. Oh, gosh. Crystal's very special to me. That's why I didn't say this beforehand, because I knew I was going to do this. I've cried on her shoulder, and she's cried on mine. And we have prayed for her daughter countless hours. And we're so thankful that the Lord has brought her so far. But what we're going to do is we're going to take, we needed that. We're going to take like a short little break, 5 minutes for you to stand up, go potty if you need to. I'm sorry, I'm used to teaching first graders. Drink some water, whatever you need to do. And then when you hear the piano start playing, y'all can come back. Thank you.